They rose from obscurity, from a name that barely echoed beyond the walls of a troubled Moscow. For generations, the Romanovs were ordinary nobles, custodians of estates and family honor, not destiny. Yet history has a habit of bending toward unlikely heirs. In the early 17th century, Russia fractured under the weight of famine, pretenders, and foreign intervention. Power became a rumor whispered between swords. The throne stood empty, cursed by indecision, and drenched in blood. Out of that void, a young boy was chosen, Mikhail Romanov, 16 years old, trembling before the crown that would define him. He did not seize power. Power was handed to him by a desperate nation, exhausted and yearning for stability. In that fragile beginning, an empire was born. Mikhail's reign marked the end of the time of troubles, but it did not erase the scars. Russia was still recovering from years of chaos, its borders uncertain, its people wary of promises. Yet the Romanov name began to harden into something larger than itself, not through brilliance or innovation, but through endurance. For 3 centuries, generation after generation would carry the crown like a burden and a weapon. They would forge an empire across continents, from the Baltic to the Pacific, conquering frozen forests and ancient steppes. They would command armies, negotiate with rival courts, and bleed for the illusion of divine right. And beneath every victory, there would be a shadow, a reminder that their power began not in conquest, but in crisis, and that crisis could always return. As the 17th century faded, a storm gathered on the throne in the figure of Peter, later called Peter the Great. He did not inherit a kingdom ready for the modern age. He inherited a country locked in time. Russia remained largely medieval, suspicious of change and anchored in ceremony. Peter was not patient. He was a force in human form. He traveled across Europe in disguise, studying shipyards, armies, and courts. He returned to Russia like a man possessed. He cut beards with his own hands, forcing nobles to shave, to dress in Western coats, to learn new sciences and new manners. He built a navy where none had existed, dragging ships across land like beasts. He carved a city out of swamp and fog, St. Petersburg, a window to Europe and a symbol of transformation hammered into the earth. Yet transformation came at a cost. Historians speak of Peter with admiration, but the empire he built was balanced on suffering. Peasants died constructing canals, fortresses, and palaces. The noble class fractured under the strain of forced progress. Traditionalists saw the soul of Russia fading beneath foreign fashions and imported ideas. For every step forward, something ancient was lost. Peter's reign set a pattern that would repeat across the Romanov dynasty. Every ruler would inherit a question with no safe answer: to modernize and risk rebellion, or to preserve the past and risk collapse. The Volkstum monarchy would walk that tightrope for centuries, knowing a fall was inevitable, but never knowing from which side. After Peter, the throne passed through a maze of assassinations, palace coups, and uneasy coronations. The Romanov dynasty depended on more than blood. It depended on perception, on the illusion of divine favor, strength, and inevitability. When that illusion faltered, knives emerged from the shadows. Empresses rose through cunning and circumstance. Elizabeth, daughter of Peter, seized power in the dead of night. Catherine, who began as a minor German princess, remade herself as Catherine the Great. She expanded the empire through diplomacy and war, defeating the Ottoman Empire, annexing Crimea, and redrawing maps with ink and artillery. She corresponded with philosophers, hosted salons, and presented Russia as a European power sympathetic to Enlightenment ideas. Yet behind the splendor, she ruled with absolute authority, crushing revolts and dissent. The Pugachev rebellion, a vast peasant uprising fueled by desperation and injustice, nearly shattered the throne. Catherine suppressed it with brutal efficiency. The empire survived, but the warning remained. The people could rise, and when they did, blood would follow. Beneath these shifting rulers, the true anatomy of the empire did not change quickly. It was held together by layers of identity and obligation, by invisible hierarchies that touched every village and every cathedral. For most of Romanov history, Russia functioned as a vast pyramid with the Tsar at the pinnacle, the nobility as its scaffold, and millions of peasants forming the foundation. Beneath the imperial pageantry was a society anchored in agrarian routines and ancestral tradition. Villages operated like worlds unto themselves, guided by elders and orthodox priests, bound by the seasons and the soil. Loyalty to the Tsar was taught as both duty and salvation. The monarch was not just a ruler. He was the axis around which the moral universe turned. This belief created stability, but it also created vulnerability. When harvests failed or taxes rose, faith was tested. When the empire expanded into territories with different languages, faiths, and customs, the idea of a single, divinely guided ruler began to fracture. The church played a dual role. It provided legitimacy to the monarchy through ritual and theology. Coronations were treated as sacraments, not ceremonies. To oppose the Tsar was to risk being seen as opposing God's plan. Icons of the imperial family hung beside saints in peasant homes, yet the church itself was constrained by the state. Since Peter's reforms, the old patriarchate had been abolished and replaced by a government-controlled synod. Priests lived between devotion and obedience, encouraged to preach loyalty and endurance more than dissent or reform. Over time, religion became not a shield, but an echo. Revered, but increasingly distant from everyday reality. When hunger gnawed and soldiers returned with stories of disaster, theology alone could not explain why suffering persisted. The Romanovs' reliance on divine authority began to feel like a language that no longer translated. Across the 19th century, the Romanovs faced a new enemy, not a single monarch or invading army, but time itself. Industrialization swept across Europe, changing societies beyond recognition. Factories roared, railways carved landscapes, workers demanded rights. Ideas about democracy, socialism, and national identity spread faster than censors could intercept them. But Russia lagged behind. Its population remained largely agrarian, bound to the land through serfdom, a system frozen in feudal logic. Serfs were not slaves in the strict legal sense, yet their lives were dictated by landowners. They owed labor, obedience, and a share of their harvests. They could be sold with land, traded like property. Reform was inevitable. Alexander II recognized that. In 1861, he abolished serfdom, formally freeing millions. It was a seismic shift, the largest social transformation in Russian history since Peter. Yet freedom came with chains. Former serfs were burdened with redemption payments, forced to buy land from their former masters. Their poverty did not end. It simply evolved. Resentment simmered, and the monarchy's attempt to adapt only confirmed how fragile its authority had become. While domestic tensions grew, war challenged the Romanovs abroad. The Crimean War exposed Russia's military weaknesses, its outdated infrastructure, and its inability to compete with modern European powers. Defeat shattered the myth of invincibility. The empire could no longer rely on tradition alone. But reform invited danger. Radical groups plotted revolution. Secret societies circulated pamphlets and bombs. In 1881, Alexander II was assassinated in a street attack, killed by an explosion as he traveled through St. Petersburg. His blood stained the snow, and the message was clear. The monarchy had run out of time to change slowly. His successor, Alexander III, drew a different conclusion from that moment. He believed survival required strength, not compromise. He reversed many reforms and ruled with iron policies, expanding secret police powers, censoring the press, and enforcing strict control over minorities through Russification. Factories grew, railways expanded, and industrial production surged, but the empire's wounds deepened. Beneath the metrics of progress, discontent coiled like a spring, tightening with every year. Different classes were now dissatisfied for different reasons. Peasants still struggled with land and debt. Workers endured harsh factory conditions. National minorities felt their languages and cultures under threat. Intellectuals and students saw no space for political expression. The empire appeared strong on paper, but its foundations were cracking. By the dawn of the 20th century, that spring was ready to snap. Nicholas, too, inherited the throne in 1894. He was earnest, devoted to his family, and committed to the idea of monarchy, but he was unprepared for the age he lived in. Russia now needed a strategist, a reformer, perhaps a visionary. Nicholas was none of these. He believed the Tsar's authority was absolute, a sacred inheritance. To question it was to betray Russia itself. History rarely shows mercy to leaders who misunderstand their era. Nicholas would be no exception. Russia stumbled into a disastrous conflict with Japan. The Russo-Japanese War was meant to be a demonstration of strength, a reminder that Russia remained a great power in Asia. Instead, it became an exposure of weakness. Russian forces were outmaneuvered and outgunned. Fleets were sunk. Soldiers died in trenches and on ships far from home. The nation watched in disbelief as a European empire lost to an Asian power, a moment that shattered imperial pride. The defeat ignited unrest across Russia. Workers marched for rights and representation. Priests led processions carrying icons and appeals for mercy. On a winter morning in 1905, these hopes collided with fear. Troops fired on unarmed protesters outside the Winter Palace. The incident became known as Bloody Sunday. Faith in the monarchy cracked. Nicholas responded with limited reforms, creating a parliament known as the Duma and issuing a manifesto promising civil liberties. It was meant to calm the storm. Instead, it highlighted division. The monarchy wanted control. The people wanted change. Every compromise felt like a door that opened to another argument. The Tsar dissolved Duma that displeased him and narrowed the electorate to favor loyalists. Meanwhile, hidden forces sharpened their plans. Revolutionary factions, from moderate socialists to the Bolsheviks, organized underground networks. Police informants fought shadows. The empire lived on borrowed time. At the Romanov court, anxiety manifested in superstition and dependence on outsiders. Demyk, heir to the throne, Alexei, suffered from hemophilia, a condition that caused prolonged bleeding from even minor injuries. There was no cure. Every fall, every bruise, every misstep threatened his life. His suffering tore through the palace like a storm. Into that void stepped Grigory Rasputin, a wandering mystic whose influence over the royal family would become infamous. Rasputin appeared to ease the boy's pain, whether through prayer, suggestion, or the simple power of calm in moments of panic. To the empress, he became indispensable. To much of the nobility, he was a parasite. To the public, he soon became a symbol of corruption and decay. His presence at court accelerated the erosion of trust. Foreign ambassadors whispered, ministers resigned, scandals multiplied. the monarchy's credibility eroded not only through policy, but perception. Then came the First World War. Russia entered to defend its allies and honor its commitments, but the decision was steeped in romanticism and miscalculation. The Russian army was vast, but ill-equipped. Soldiers marched to the front short of weapons and supplies. Rail networks collapsed under the strain of war. Casualties mounted by the millions. Nicholas took command of the army personally, tying his fate to every defeat and retreat. In his absence, the Empress and Rasputin wielded influence in the capital. Ministers rotated like seasons, replaced in rapid succession. The government resembled a revolving door of fear and improvisation. In 1916, a group of nobles orchestrated Rasputin's assassination. They believed they were saving Russia and the monarchy from further disgrace. They were mistaken. The damage to the Romanovs' reputation was already irreversible. Hunger spread in the cities. Factories shut down or slowed. Bread lines stretched across frosted streets. Faith in the monarchy dissolved like ice under spring sun. In February 1917, revolution erupted. Soldiers mutinied rather than fire on crowds. Workers seized factories. Crowds filled the streets demanding bread, peace, and representation. Nicholas abdicated, ending 3 centuries of Romanov rule. The dynasty that began with a boy chosen to save a nation ended with a man forced to surrender to its fury. The family was placed under house arrest, first in the Alexander Palace, then transported to Siberia, and finally to a modest residence in the Urals. Their world shrank from palaces and ceremonies to cold rooms, simple clothing, and rationed bread. They were no longer rulers. They were prisoners of history. The provisional government that replaced Nicholas struggled to hold the country together and eventually fell to the Bolsheviks, who seized power in a second revolution. Civil war tore Russia apart. Red armies and white armies fought across ruined landscapes, villages burned, and cities changed hands. In the chaos, the Romanovs remained hostages to fate. Their existence became a question with no acceptable answer. To release them risked restoration. To keep them imprisoned risked rescue. In July 1918, in a basement in Yekaterinburg, that question was resolved with gunfire. Nicholas, Alexandra, their children, and their remaining servants were executed by firing squad. No coronation, no funeral procession, no empire to mourn at an open grave. 300 years of rule reduced in a single night to silence and shadows. The Romanovs died not as monarchs, but as symbols. Symbols of a world collapsing under the weight of its own contradictions. Symbols of the cost of being unable to change fast enough in a century of upheaval. After the dynasty fell and the family died, Russia underwent a transformation as violent as it was absolute. The old structures dissolved. Noble titles were abolished. Estates were seized. Many churches were stripped of property or repurposed. The hierarchy that had once held the Romanovs aloft was dismantled brick by brick. Yet even in absence, their presence lingered. The memory of the monarchy became a political tool. For the new regime, the Romanovs represented everything that had to be overcome. For exiles abroad, they represented a homeland lost to ideology and chaos. In this divergence, myth took root. Of all the myths that survived the Romanovs, none captured the world's imagination like the story of Anastasia. A missing body, rumors of escape, claimants emerging decades later, insisting they were the lost princess. Some were sincere, others were opportunists. None were proven to be her. For years, governments and relatives engaged in investigations, interrogations, and legal battles. The mystery was sustained by fragments of evidence, conflicting testimonies, and the human instinct to hope against hope. It became a narrative refuge, a way for people to rewrite the ending. If one child survived, then perhaps the tragedy was not total. Perhaps innocence could escape history's cruelty. But truth does not negotiate with comfort. Scientific analysis in the late 20th and early 21st centuries identified remains believed to belong to the missing children. The myth of Anastasia was not erased, but it was reframed, not as a possibility, but as a longing for a different ending than the one history provided. Sainthood offered another form of myth-making. In the late 20th century, the Romanov family was canonized by branches of the Orthodox Church, not for their political legacy, but for their acceptance of suffering and violent death. Icons now depict them with halos, their images venerated as martyrs. This canonization created a bridge between faith and history, a way to honor their memory without restoring their authority. It also introduced complexity. How do you sanctify a family whose reign included oppression, forced labor, and violent suppression of dissent? The answer, for many believers, lies not in justification, but in separation. The sainted Romanovs are not the rulers who signed decrees and ordered campaigns. They are the victims in the basement. The final chapter, not the first 299 years. Meanwhile, historians continue to evaluate their legacy through records, testimonies, and analysis. 300 years of rule cannot be reduced to a single verdict. There were moments of progress that pushed Russia forward and moments of cruelty that held it back. Victories that expanded the empire's borders and decisions that fractured its social fabric. The Romanovs were not monolithic. They were individuals shaped by their eras, their fears, and their beliefs. But the dynasty as a whole became a symbol of what happens when a system becomes too rigid to survive the changes of its own world. A symbol of how power can endure for centuries, yet fall in a single season. The deeper tragedy of the Romanovs is not simply that they fell. It is that they fell without knowing how to stand differently. Their downfall was not inevitable at the beginning, but it became inevitable by the end. The structures they inherited were incompatible with the future they entered. By the time Nicholas II recognized the scale of the crisis, there were no solutions left that did not require the destruction of the monarchy itself. And so the monarchy was destroyed, not just in practice, but in principle, in memory, in meaning. If the Romanovs teach anything, it is that systems must evolve with the people they govern, that loyalty is not eternal, but earned, and that the greatest threat to power is not rebellion, but irrelevance. Empires fall long before they collapse. They fall in the minds of the people, in the conversations whispered in kitchens, in the letters smuggled across borders, in the questions asked persistently. By the time the first barricade is built or the first shot is fired, the fall has already happened. What remains is only the conclusion. 300 years. A dynasty that began with a frightened boy and ended with a family facing a firing squad. The Romanovs endure not through power, but through memory. And memory, unlike power, belongs to everyone. History does not offer second chances, but it offers warnings that echo across centuries, waiting for someone to listen.